The rain had already soaked through Elodie Mercer's black mourning dress when she heard her dead brother's name being used to decide who would own her next. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today's story is the Alpha King married his dead friend's unwanted Omega sister. Then he couldn't let her go. If stories about courage, dignity, and unexpected love speak to you, please subscribe and tap the notification bell. Your support helps our channel grow. Now back to Elodie. Nathan Mercer had been buried less than 10 minutes. Rain drifted across the hillside cemetery, gathering on the pine branches and turning the freshly opened earth around his grave nearly black. Elodie stood without an umbrella, staring at the coffin disappearing beneath the soil. Nathan had been more than her older brother. He had been the one person who never introduced her with an apology hidden in his voice. In the Mercer household, Elodie had learned early what being an Omega meant. At family dinners, stronger wolves were asked about their futures. She was asked whether she could make herself useful. When alliances were discussed, cousins had names. Elodie had a category, someone Nathan would eventually have to provide for. He always rejected that cruelty. "You're my sister, not my burden," he would tell her. Now he was beneath 6 feet of wet earth, and the people behind her were proving how much his protection had mattered. "This cannot wait," Vanessa Mercer said. Nathan and Elodie's aunt had assumed control of the household after his death, and apparently grief had been allotted less time than the funeral flowers. "Grant Holloway has been patient. With Nathan gone, we need stability." "She just buried her brother," someone murmured. Vanessa lowered her voice, though Elodie still heard every word. "Elodie has no rank, no useful alliance, and no one responsible for her anymore. Grant is willing to take her. Frankly, she is fortunate anyone is." Elodie's fingers curled against her palms. "Anyone?" She stared at Nathan's headstone and fought the humiliating urge to ask a dead man what she was supposed to do now. Across the grave stood Alpha King Everett Calloway. At 34, Everett possessed the kind of stillness that made other men lower their voices. Rain darkened his ceremonial coat and dampened his short brown-black hair, but his steel-gray gaze remained fixed on the grave of the man who had commanded his royal vanguard. Nathan had also been his closest friend. They had grown into adulthood together, fought side by side, and survived battles neither man spoke about afterward. Everett had barely spoken since arriving. But when Vanessa mentioned Grant, his attention shifted. Elodie never noticed. Footsteps pressed into the soaked grass behind her. Grant Holloway stopped beside her, broad and immaculate in charcoal wool, looking less like a mourner than a man arriving to inspect something promised to him. Elodie. She did not face him. "Not today, Grant. Especially today." His hand closed around her wrist. He did not squeeze. He did not need to. The casual certainty of the gesture told her everything. "Your aunt and I have nearly settled the arrangement." Elodie finally looked at him. "What arrangement?" "Our marriage. I never agreed to marry you." Grant gave her a patient smile. "You're an unbonded Omega without Nathan now. Be sensible." Around them, several mourners lowered their eyes. No one objected. That hurt almost as much as Grant's hand. Then came a faint metallic sound from across the grave. Everett had reached beneath his coat and closed his fingers around a silver compass pendant. For an instant, the cemetery was gone from his mind. There was only smoke, blood, a distant battlefield, and Nathan forcing that piece of silver into Everett's hand while his strength faded. A request. A promise. One Everett had prayed would never become necessary. Elodie pulled against Grant's grip. His fingers tightened. "You'll thank me eventually." "Let her go." Everett's voice was quiet enough that Grant almost seemed more frightened by it. Every conversation stopped. Grant released her and turned. "Your Majesty, this is a Mercer family matter." Everett walked toward them. "Not anymore." Vanessa hurried forward. "Surely you understand. Elodie needs a husband. Alpha Holloway has generously agreed to accept her despite." "Despite what?" Everett asked. Vanessa faltered. Elodie wished the ground would open beneath her. Everett looked at her then, not at her dress, her Omega status, or the family waiting to dispose of her. At her. Vanessa recovered. The point is that someone must take responsibility for her. Everett's hand remained around Nathan's compass. His gaze shifted to Grant, then to the grave. When he spoke again, there was no hesitation. You want her married? The rain whispered over the stunned gathering. Then she'll marry me. For several seconds, even the rain seemed to disappear beneath the silence. Elodie stared at Everett. Certain grief had twisted his words into something she had misunderstood. An alpha king did not marry an unwanted omega from a declining household. Not without a reason. Your Majesty, Vanessa finally managed, perhaps this is not the place for such a decision. Everett's expression remained unreadable. You were prepared to decide her future beside her brother's grave. The location only became inappropriate when the decision stopped being yours. Vanessa paled. Grant's jaw tightened, but he was wise enough not to challenge the king before witnesses. Elodie wished she possessed the same certainty. May I speak with you? She asked Everett. Alone. A murmur passed through the mourners. Everett merely inclined his head. He led her toward the stone chapel beyond the cemetery, leaving Lucas Bennett, his royal beta, to ensure no one followed. Inside, the air smelled of old cedar and extinguished candles. Elodie folded her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how badly she was trembling. Why? Everett stood several feet away. He had not touched her once. After Grant's possessive grip, that distance felt strangely deliberate. Because Holloway will not have you. That isn't an answer. Something shifted behind his eyes. Nathan trusted me. There it was. Elodie looked toward the rain streaking the narrow chapel window. She had known before asking, yet hearing her brother's name still hurt. So this is a debt, a promise. Is there a difference? Everett did not answer immediately. There is to me. Elodie swallowed. And what exactly would being your wife require? Nothing you do not freely consent to. His reply came without hesitation. You will have your own rooms, your own household allowance. No one will dictate where you go, whom you speak to, or what duties you perform. Our marriage will place you beyond Vanessa's authority and Holloway's claim. She studied him, searching for the hidden price. In your bed, his gaze held hers. Only if you ever choose it. The simple answer unsettled her more than a demand might have. She had spent years learning that protection always came with conditions. Everett was offering walls without a cage. You would marry someone you don't love because Nathan asked you to protect me? His face hardened slightly at the final word, though she could not tell why. I would rather enter a marriage knowing its limits than watch you enter one where your wishes mean nothing. By sunset, Elodie had agreed. 3 days later, Silvercrest Citadel rose before her carriage like something carved from the mountain itself. Snow covered its towers while banners bearing the royal wolf snapped above dark stone walls. Inside waited a court that had already heard every version of the scandal. The Alpha King had returned from a funeral with an Omega bride. Their wedding took place that evening beneath the open ceremonial dome, where moonlight spilled across the pale stone floor. Elodie wore a simple ivory gown chosen from the royal wardrobe. Everett stood beside her in black, solemn rather than joyful. When the vows ended, he did not kiss her for spectacle. He offered his hand and waited until she chose to place hers in it. That small courtesy almost broke her composure. At the reception, nobles watched her with smiles too polished to be kind. Then a blonde woman in silver approached. Celeste Warren. She introduced herself, though Elodie already recognized the daughter of one of Silvercrest's most influential alphas. Celeste's gaze traveled over her without open hostility. That made the judgment worse. Nathan Mercer must have been an extraordinary man. Elodie's fingers tightened around her glass. He was extraordinary enough, Celeste continued softly, to leave his sister a king when he died. Nearby conversations faltered. Heat climbed Elodie's neck. She could have endured cruelty. Pity was harder. Before she could answer, a hand appeared beside hers. Everett. He said nothing to Celeste. Instead, before the watching court, he extended his palm toward Elodie exactly as he had at the altar. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. Everett turned toward the room. You seem confused about whom you are receiving tonight. His tone never rose. "This is Elodie Calloway, my wife. You will show her the respect that title commands." One by one, the nobles bowed. Elodie stood beside him, while people who would not have noticed her yesterday lowered their heads. Yet beneath the relief came a quieter ache. Everett had given her his name, his protection, and a place no one could take from her. But later that night, when he escorted her to a beautiful suite and stopped outside the door rather than entering, Elodie understood the boundary perfectly. "Good night, Elodie." "Good night, Everett." He walked away. She closed the door and leaned against it, surrounded by everything an unwanted Omega could have dreamed of receiving. Everything, perhaps, except the one thing she was beginning to fear she wanted most, to be chosen for herself. By the end of Elodie's first week at Silvercrest, she had learned that becoming the Alpha King's wife did not make loneliness disappear. It merely gave loneliness larger rooms. Servants dressed her, guards followed her, and courtiers bowed whenever she passed. Yet most conversations stopped the moment she entered. Everett remained unfailingly courteous. Breakfast appeared every morning with a note informing her of his council schedule, but he never assumed she wanted his company. He had promised freedom, and he honored it so carefully that sometimes Elodie wondered whether he was relieved to keep his distance. One afternoon, escaping another lesson on royal etiquette, she followed the scent of rosemary and antiseptic into the Citadel infirmary. Dr. Rebecca Lawson looked up from bandaging an elderly guard. "If you're lost, Your Majesty, the royal wing is 3 corridors east." "I know. Elodie noticed a basket overflowing, with clean linen. Do you need help?" Rebecca studied her for a moment. "Can you fold sheets?" "Better than I can discuss seating precedents." Rebecca laughed, the first unguarded laugh Elodie had heard since arriving. "Then you're hired." What began with linen became an afternoon, then another. Elodie learned which wounded soldiers hated bitter medicine, which widows needed assistance completing pension requests, and which children became frightened when their fathers disappeared behind treatment curtains. She never announced herself as queen. She simply listened. 3 days later, Everett entered the infirmary, searching for Rebecca, and stopped when he saw his wife kneeling beside an aging soldier. "My daughter lives near Briar Ridge," the man was saying. "She doesn't know I'm here." "Then we'll send word," Elodie replied. "Tonight. The roads are bad. Then we'll send someone stubborn." She glanced up and found Everett watching. "Your Majesty seems qualified." The soldier went rigid. Everett surprised them both. Painfully so, according to my beta. That evening a royal courier left for Briar Ridge. Everett said nothing about it at dinner. But the following morning Elodie found authorization on Rebecca's desk allowing families of injured Royal Vanguard soldiers temporary lodging inside Silvercrest. She recognized Everett's signature. He had listened. That realization followed her for days. So did his attention. Everett began noticing her too. The way she remembered servants' names, how she lowered her voice around frightened children, how she gave away the sugared pears from her own breakfast because one recovering boy loved them. None of it resembled courtly performance. Nathan had possessed the same instinct to protect people, but his kindness had been loud, boots running toward danger, laughter after battle, a sword raised between another man and death. Elodie's courage lived in quieter places. One winter evening, Everett returned from council after midnight and noticed light beneath the infirmary door. Inside, Rebecca was asleep over her records. Elodie sat beside a feverish little girl whose father had been wounded on patrol. The child's breathing had finally steadied. Elodie had fallen asleep too, curled awkwardly in a wooden chair, her chestnut hair loose over one shoulder and her own wool cloak tucked around the girl. Everett remained in the doorway. He remembered Nathan once complaining that Elodie would give away her last blanket and then apologize for shivering. At the time, Everett had laughed. Now he could not. He crossed the room, removed his coat, and carefully laid it over Elodie's shoulders. Her eyes opened. Instinctively, she reached for the child before realizing who stood beside her. "Her fever broke," she whispered. "Rebecca thinks she'll be fine. And you?" Elodie blinked. "What about me?" The question struck him harder than it should have. She genuinely did not understand why anyone would ask. Everett looked at the woman everyone had described as an inconvenient omega, then at the cloak she had surrendered without hesitation. For years, Nathan had asked him to make certain Elodie was protected. Standing there in the dim infirmary, Everett found himself wondering something Nathan had never answered. "Who took care of you, Elodie?" Her expression changed. Before she could respond, the infirmary doors opened sharply behind them. Lucas entered carrying a sealed council document. His usual humor was gone. "Everett, we have a problem." He handed over the paper. Several Northern Alphas had formally challenged Elodie's position at the upcoming Winter Council, and Celeste Warren's name stood among the signatures. Everett read the challenge twice before lifting his eyes to Lucas. "They're questioning her right to stand beside me." "Not the marriage," Lucas said. "Her authority." Across the infirmary, Elodie had gone still. The distinction was almost crueler. They would tolerate her as Everett's protected wife, apparently, so long as she remained decorative. "When is the Winter Council?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Everett replied. "Then I'll attend." His gaze sharpened. "You don't have to prove anything to them." "Maybe not, but if I hide, they'll decide what I am without ever hearing me speak." The next afternoon, the council chamber filled with leaders from across Silvercrest. Elodie entered beside Everett, wearing deep green rather than royal silver, refusing Celeste Warren's unspoken contest of elegance before it began. She took her assigned seat and listened while border disputes, winter patrols, and grain reserves were discussed. Then Alpha Marcusdale of Frostmere rose. 3 mountain packs received reduced shipments again this month. If the eastern roads close, families will go hungry. The royal steward insisted the allocations were mathematically correct. Elodie looked down at the figures before her. Something felt wrong. During her days with Rebecca, she had helped 2 soldiers write letters home. Both came from those mountain territories. Both had mentioned displaced families moving inland after early snowfall destroyed several outer settlements. "May I ask something?" Elodie said. Several heads turned with visible surprise. The steward frowned. "Your Majesty? These numbers use last spring's population counts, don't they?" "Naturally." "Then they're wrong." A silence fell. Celeste leaned back. "That is a serious accusation from someone unfamiliar with royal administration." Elodie felt every instinct urging her to become smaller. Instead, she remembered the elderly guard waiting for news from Briar Ridge. Not an accusation, a question. She turned to Marcus. "How many families moved into Frostmere after the first snow?" His expression changed. "Nearly 40. Another Alpha slowly sat forward. "We took 23. Within minutes, the error became undeniable. Supplies had been distributed according to populations that no longer existed. Everett ordered the records corrected and emergency grain released before the mountain passes closed. What might have become a winter disaster had been hiding inside numbers no one thought to question. The chamber's attention shifted toward Elodie, and for once she could not identify it as pity. Celeste's expression tightened. Then a gray-haired Alpha near the end of the table gave a humorless laugh. "Remarkable. A few afternoons among sick soldiers, and suddenly Nathan Mercer's little charity case is advising the crown." The words struck deeper than Elodie expected. Before she could answer, Everett rose. "No." Growl. No threat. Somehow, that was more intimidating. "Stand." The Alpha's face drained. "Your Majesty, you question my wife's judgment after her judgment prevented your people from going hungry. So stand and repeat what you called her." The man pushed reluctantly to his feet. "I spoke poorly." "You spoke comfortably," Everett said. "That concerns me more." He looked around the chamber. Elodie does not need Nathan's memory to justify her presence here. She does not need my pity, and she will not earn respect by becoming louder, harder, or more like any of you. His gaze returned to the offending Alpha. "You will speak to my wife with respect, or you will not speak in my court." Something inside Elodie shifted. At their wedding, Everett had defended her title. Today he had defended her. Not Nathan's sister. Not an Omega under royal protection. Her. The council resumed, but the world between them did not return to what it had been. That evening, Elodie found Everett alone on a balcony overlooking snow-covered Silvercrest. "Thank you," she said. "You shouldn't have needed me to say it. That isn't what I meant." He turned. She was closer than either of them expected. For a moment, neither moved. "You said I didn't need Nathan's memory to justify being here." Everett's expression softened. "You don't. Do you believe that?" "Yes." The answer came too quickly to be ceremonial. Elodie's breath caught as his eyes dropped briefly to her mouth, then returned to hers. Everett stepped back first, but the distance no longer felt safe. Because now they both knew he was no longer looking at her only as the woman his dead friend had asked him to protect. Everett stepped away from the balcony first, but afterward distance became harder to maintain than closeness. Over the next 2 weeks, Elodie noticed small changes no courtier would have considered important. Everett stopped beginning dinner until she arrived. A chair appeared beside the fireplace in his private study because she once mentioned the council library was too cold. When a late meeting kept him away, a servant brought her a plate with 2 sugared pears instead of 1. Neither of them acknowledged any of it. Then a blizzard trapped half the northern roads, and Everett spent 2 nights coordinating relief shipments. On the 3rd evening, Elodie found him asleep over a map in his study, one hand still curled around a report. She could have left. Instead, she quietly moved the candle away from the papers and draped a blanket across his shoulders. Everett woke instantly. His hand caught hers before he recognized her. He released it just as quickly. "You should be." Rebecca says exhaustion makes kings unbearable. Rebecca says many treasonous things. Elodie smiled and noticed blood darkening the side of his training shirt. "You reopened your scar." "It's nothing." "Of course. You're bleeding decoratively." This time he laughed, softly, unexpectedly, and the sound changed something in the room. Elodie brought clean bandages. Everett hesitated before lifting his shirt enough to expose the old wound along his left ribs. "Nathan dragged me away from the battle that gave me this," he said. "Half a mile through mud while complaining I was too heavy. He complained when carrying groceries. He threatened to leave me 3 times. Elodie's smile faded. "But he didn't." Everett looked toward the fire. "No." She heard what he had not said. "You surviving wasn't a betrayal of him." His eyes returned to hers. Elodie began wrapping the bandage. "He would hate that you've turned being alive into another debt." For several heartbeats, Everett said nothing. Then he asked, "When did you become so difficult?" "Sometime after you married me." Her fingers brushed his skin. Neither laughed now. Before she could withdraw, a knock sounded. Lucas entered with news that a supply wagon bound for Frostmere had overturned in the storm. The replacement route would require opening the king's private winter reserve, grain traditionally protected for Silvercrest itself. "The council will object," Lucas warned. Everett looked at the distribution map, then at Elodie. She said nothing. She did not need to. Those mountain families were the same people whose missing numbers she had exposed at Winter Council. "Open the reserve," Everett said. Lucas studied him. "If the storm lasts another month, then I'll answer for it. The nobles will say she influenced you." Everett's gaze settled on Elodie. "Let them." By morning, Royal Grain was moving north. It was the first time Everett had knowingly spent political capital on a judgment Elodie had helped shape, and he never once told the court he had done it for Nathan Mercer. That night, Elodie found him again beside the study fire. "You risk criticism because of what I said." "No," Everett moved closer. "I listened because you were right." The distinction struck somewhere tender. She reached for the fresh bandage at his side. "Let me check this." Elodie held still. Her fingertips grazed the edge of his scar. Everett inhaled. She felt it too, warmth gathering where their skin met, deeper than ordinary touch, spreading through her chest like something waking after a long winter. His wolf surged toward the sensation with sudden recognition. Elodie's eyes widened. "Everett," he caught her hand, then immediately loosened his fingers, leaving her free to pull away. She didn't. For one suspended moment, duty, Nathan, the crown, and every reason they had married seemed to fall silent. Everett wanted to close the remaining inches between them. Instead, he released her. "We stop here." Pain flickered across her face. Why? Because whatever this is, I won't let instinct choose for you. What if I was choosing? The question nearly destroyed his restraint. Everett looked at her for a long moment. Then I need to know you're choosing me. Not gratitude, not safety, and not a bond neither of us understands yet. Elodie left without answering. But neither could return to pretending their marriage was merely an obligation. 3 nights later, Lucas entered Everett's study carrying a weather-stained leather dispatch pouch recovered from a collapsed Royal Vanguard outpost. He placed 2 sealed envelopes on the desk. One bore Everett's name. The other bore Elodie's. Both were written in Nathan Mercer's unmistakable hand. Everett did not open Nathan's letter immediately. For several minutes, he stood behind his desk, staring at the familiar handwriting while Lucas waited in silence. Nathan had written his name hundreds of times on military reports, tavern debts, and irreverent notes slipped beneath council documents. This was different. The envelope had been sealed before a battle Nathan never returned from. "Does Elodie know?" Everett asked. "Not yet. Bring her here." When Elodie arrived, she saw her brother's name and stopped in the doorway. The color left her face. Everett moved toward her instinctively, then caught himself before touching her. These were recovered from an old Vanguard outpost. Elodie approached the desk as though it were an altar. Her fingertips rested on the envelope addressed to her. How long? They were trapped behind a collapsed wall. No one knew they existed. She swallowed and picked it up. "Will you read yours?" Everett nodded. They turned away from each other, granting privacy while sharing the same grief. Nathan's message to Everett was shorter than expected. He wrote of an operation going wrong, of enemies closing in, and of the possibility that he might not return. Then came the words that changed everything Everett believed he had been honoring. Nathan had never asked him to marry Elodie. He had asked something harder. Make sure she gets to choose. Don't let Vanessa trade her future for security. Don't let any alpha convince her that being an omega means she owes him obedience. If I'm gone, remind her she belongs to herself. Everett read the lines again. The silver compass beneath his shirt suddenly felt unbearably heavy. At Nathan's grave, he had believed marriage was the surest way to place Elodie beyond Vanessa and Grant's reach. He had tried to protect her choice by making a choice for her. Across the room came a broken breath. Elodie pressed her letter against her chest, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "He knew," she whispered. Everett looked up. "Knew what?" "That I thought I was a burden." She wiped her face. "He said he spent years trying to protect me, but maybe he protected me so much that I never learned I could protect myself." Everett could have interpreted Nathan's words for her. Instead, he gave her only what his own letter said. "He wanted me to protect your freedom." Elodie's eyes met his. "Not marry me?" "No." The single word seemed to alter the shape of the room. She looked toward the fire. "Then you don't owe him this anymore." "Elodie, Vanessa cannot decide my life forever. Grant has no right to my consent. I'm not the woman they cornered at Nathan's grave anymore." Her voice remained steady, though her fingers tightened around Nathan's letter. "And you're free to." Everett almost laughed at the cruelty of those words. Freedom was what he had promised her from the beginning. Why did hearing her offer it back feel so much like loss? "Is that what you want?" Elodie wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him she listened for his footsteps each evening, that the chair across from him had begun to feel like hers, that the warmth awakened by his touch still lived beneath her skin. But wanting Everett was not the same as knowing Everett wanted her. She could not build a life on the fear that every tenderness was another payment toward Nathan's debt. "I think we should settle whatever Vanessa and Grant believe they still have the right to claim," she said. "After that, there will be no reason you have to remain married to me." Everett's jaw tightened. "You think obligation is the only reason I've remained." Hope rose too quickly inside her. "Isn't it?" He could have answered. Instead, years of discipline closed around the words he had not yet learned how to speak. Elodie saw the hesitation and mistook it for confirmation. "Then it's settled." She turned toward the door. "When this is over, I'll leave Silvercrest." Everett remained motionless after she disappeared into the corridor. Lucas entered quietly from outside. "You're going to let her go?" Everett looked down at Nathan's letter. If that's what she chooses, I have to. Before Lucas could respond, the warning bell above the Citadel gate rang 3 times. A guard rushed into the study. Your Majesty, Alpha Grant Holloway has arrived with delegates from 4 packs. He's demanding an emergency council at sunrise. The guard hesitated. He says your marriage to Elodie was entered under false pretenses, and he intends to enforce his original agreement. At sunrise, Grant Holloway entered the council chamber expecting to leave with Elodie. Vanessa walked beside him, followed by 4 northern delegates whose presence turned his private claim into a political challenge. Everett sat at the head of the chamber. Elodie stood to his right with Nathan's letter tucked inside her sleeve. King Calloway married her under a false understanding, Grant announced. Nathan Mercer never asked him to take his sister as a wife. Once that marriage is dissolved, the original agreement between House Mercer and Red Pine should be honored. Vanessa placed the contract on the table. Elodie recognized her aunt's signature beneath Grant's. When was this written? Vanessa hesitated. Grant answered for her. Before the funeral. The words carried Elodie back to wet earth, striking Nathan's coffin, to lowered eyes and voices deciding what should become of her. Before we buried him, she said. Vanessa lifted her chin. Someone had to secure your future. Elodie touched Nathan's letter through her sleeve. Once, that sentence would have reduced her to silence. Now she stepped away from Everett and walked into the center of the chamber alone. No, you secured what you wanted for my future. Grant's expression hardened. Enough, Elodie. She faced him. You held my wrist beside my brother's grave and told me I would understand eventually. So understand me now. Her voice remained level. I will not marry you. You're an Omega without a household alpha. I'm a woman telling you no. Grant looked toward Everett. Are you going to allow this? Everett's wolf pressed violently against his restraint, but he remained where he was. Elodie had spent too many years being spoken for by people who called it protection. This answer had to belong entirely to her. Grant reached for the contract. Vanessa had legal authority. She did not. Lucas placed a weathered document beside it, the inheritance declaration recovered with Nathan's letters. Before his final campaign, Nathan had named Elodie sole heir to his personal holdings. Vanessa had been allowed to administer the Mercer household temporarily, but she had never possessed authority to bargain away Elodie's inheritance or marriage rights. One delegate withdrew his support, then another. Grant stared at the document. Elodie barely glanced at it. That paper doesn't make me free, she said. It proves I already was. Her gaze returned to Grant. And even if it didn't exist, my answer would still be no. The remaining delegates stepped back. Vanessa lowered her eyes first. Only then did Everett rise. He did not move in front of Elodie. He came to stand beside her. Alpha Holloway's petition is denied. Any further attempt to enforce this agreement will be treated as coercion under Silvercrest law. Grant left with his pride wounded and his political support collapsing behind him. Vanessa followed, stripped of the authority she had assumed no one would question. When the chamber finally emptied, Elodie exhaled and gripped the edge of the table. Everett wanted to gather her against him. Instead, he placed another document before her. His signature was already at the bottom. "What is this?" she asked. "Your release." Elodie looked up. "Everett, Nathan asked me to protect your right to choose. I misunderstood that once. I won't misunderstand it again." His voice remained controlled, but his hand betrayed him, tightening once before falling still. "Our marriage will never become another reason you have to stay." Her eyes filled. "Even if I choose to leave?" A long silence passed between them. Especially then, Elodie stared at the man who had once married her because he believed honor required it and was now willing to surrender the only bond that could keep her beside him. "You don't have to do this." "Yes," Everett said quietly. "Edo." She signed beneath his name. The scratch of the pen sounded unbearably loud. "Rebecca knows people near Briar Ridge," Elodie said. "I can work there. Find somewhere of my own." Every instinct in Everett demanded that he ask her to stay. He folded the release instead and placed it carefully in her hand. "Then I'll make sure the road is safe." Elodie's mouth trembled. You're still protecting me. Everett looked at her for a moment. I'm trying to learn how to care for you without deciding what that care requires from you. Something in her expression softened and broke at the same time. She waited, perhaps hoping he would say more. He didn't. By dawn the next morning, her carriage had already passed through Silvercrest gates. Everett entered her suite and found her trunks gone, her unfinished book beside the window, and one sugared pear waiting on the table. He picked it up slowly. For months, he had feared that wanting Elodie would become another cage around her. Standing in the room she had emptied by choice, Everett finally understood the cost of his silence. He had given her complete freedom, and now the woman he had promised never to keep was leaving with no idea that his heart had already chosen her. Everett stood in Elodie's empty room with the sugared pear in his hand, and for once there was no counsel, law, or promise behind which he could hide. Her book remained open beside the window, a ribbon marking the page. A second cup sat near the small table where she had taken tea while reviewing infirmary requests. His coat, the one he had placed over her shoulders beside the feverish child, hung neatly across a chair. Nothing in the room was important by itself. Together, the ordinary things hurt more than losing a battle ever had. Lucas appeared at the doorway. Her carriage left 20 minutes ago. Everett did not turn. She made her choice. She did. Lucas paused. So did you? Everett finally looked at him. I gave her freedom. You gave her silence. The words landed cleanly. Lucas nodded toward the abandoned room. Nathan asked you not to decide for her. He never asked you to make sure she never knew what you wanted. Everett looked down at the pear in his palm. Then he moved. Minutes later, his horse thundered through Silvercrest gates. He rode alone, refusing the escort that tried to follow. Snow sprayed beneath the stallion's hooves as the road descended through the pines toward the southern boundary. Elodie's carriage reached the old stone bridge shortly after sunrise. She had spent the entire journey telling herself not to look back. Briar Ridge offered work, a room of her own, a life chosen without Vanessa, Grant, Nathan, or Everett determining its shape. It was everything she had claimed to want. Then hoofbeats broke. Through the morning stillness, the driver slowed. Elodie's heart betrayed her before she saw him. Everett appeared through the trees without royal guards or banners, his dark coat open against the cold. He stopped several yards from the carriage and dismounted. He did not command the driver. He did not reach for the door. He simply waited. Elodie stepped down. Did something happen? Yes. His breath clouded between them. I'll let you leave without telling you the truth. She went very still. Everett approached, stopping far enough away that the final distance remained hers to cross. At Nathan's grave, I married you because I thought keeping my promise meant putting you somewhere no one could reach you. His voice roughened. I was wrong. Then I spent weeks telling myself every time I looked for you at dinner, every time I listened for you in the corridor, every time I wanted to know whether you had eaten or slept or smiled that day. It was responsibility. Elodie's eyes filled, but she said nothing. When Nathan's letter arrived, I thought releasing you was the last thing I owed him. Everett shook his head. But you left, and I walked into your room this morning, and there was nothing left for me to pretend. He removed the silver compass pendant from beneath his shirt. Nathan's silver flashed between them. I married you because I loved your brother. His hand closed around it. I came after you because I love you. Elodie's breath caught. Everett did not touch her. I'm not asking you to return because you're my wife. You aren't bound to me anymore. I'm asking because Silvercrest became home when you started leaving books unfinished in its rooms and making soldiers write to their daughters and saving ridiculous sugared pears for me. A tear slipped down her cheek. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew how to protect someone. I didn't know how to need them without fearing that need would become another cage. Elodie stepped closer. And now I know loving you means the door stays open. He extended the compass toward her. Even if you walk through it. She covered his hand instead of taking the pendant. Warmth moved between their palms again, deeper than before, but neither looked away. I'm still angry with you, she whispered. Everett's mouth softened. I was hoping you might be. A small, tearful laugh escaped her. And I'm not ready to pretend everything is fixed. Then we won't. For the first time, Elodie closed the distance herself and rested her forehead against his. Everett remained perfectly still until her fingers tightened around his. "Take me back to Silvercrest," she whispered. "Not as Nathan's promise." His eyes closed briefly. "Never again." Elodie looked at the compass between their joined hands. "There's one question I need you to answer before I choose what comes next." Elodie kept her hand over Everett's, the silver compass warm between their palms. "There's one thing I need to know before I go back." Everett waited. "If Nathan had never been your friend, if there had been no promise, no funeral, no reason to protect me, would you still choose me?" He could have answered yes immediately. Instead, he gave her something better than reassurance. "The truth. Nathan brought you into my life. I want to erase him just to make our story prettier." His thumb moved across the compass edge. "But Nathan isn't why I know you leave the crust beside your soup when you're worried. He isn't why I recognize your footsteps outside my study. He isn't why I opened the winter reserve after you taught me to see families where my counsel once saw numbers." Elodie's eyes shimmered. "And he isn't why an empty room this morning frightened me more than any battlefield ever has." Everett placed the compass in her hand. "Nathan, show me the road. You're the reason I want to keep walking it." Elodie closed her fingers around her brother's pendant. Then, for the first time since Everett had entered her life, she extended her other hand to him first. "Take me home." He looked at her offered palm. At their first wedding, he had always been the one reaching toward her, waiting for a frightened Omega to decide whether it was safe to accept. Now Elodie stood freely beyond Silvercrest's boundary, legally bound to no one, asking him to walk beside her. Everett took her hand. "Home," he said. They did not restore their old marriage. That mattered. The first had begun with Nathan's death, Vanessa's coercion, and Everett's misunderstood promise. If they were going to belong to each other now, they would begin again. Several weeks later, beneath Silvercrest's open ceremonial dome, Elodie walked toward Everett without anyone escorting or giving her away. Rebecca fastened the final clasp of her ivory cloak before stepping back. Lucas stood beside Everett, smiling with none of his usual restraint. Even Celeste Warren attended. When Elodie passed her, Celeste lowered her head first. Elodie returned the gesture. Respect was enough. Grant Holloway's fraudulent agreement had been voided, and the 4 packs that once supported his petition withdrew from him. Vanessa lost control of Nathan's estate after his recovered declaration established Elodie as sole heir. Elodie asked for neither punishment nor public humiliation. She needed nothing from either of them now, not apology, approval, or permission. At the altar, Everett did not offer his hand. This time, Elodie offered hers. A faint smile touched his face before their fingers joined. "No debts," she whispered. "No debts," he agreed. "No promises made for someone else. Only the ones we make to each other." Their vows were brief. Everett chose Elodie Mercer, knowing she was free to refuse him. Elodie chose Everett Calloway, knowing she no longer needed his crown to protect her. When they were legally declared husband and wife again, warmth moved through their joined hands with startling force. Their wolves answered together. The bond that had stirred months earlier finally opened fully, not as a command demanding obedience, but as recognition arriving after choice. Everett searched her face. "Elodie," she smiled. "Yes." Only then did they accept the bond together. By spring, Elodie had turned her work with Rebecca into a permanent Silvercrest program, providing lodging and support for wounded soldiers and their families. She never became louder to imitate the alphas around her. Instead, the court gradually learned to become quiet when she spoke. On the first warm morning after the snow melted, Everett accompanied her back to Nathan's grave. Fresh grass covered the earth that had once been black beneath funeral rain. Elodie knelt and rested the silver compass against the headstone. "You were right," she whispered. "I belonged to myself first." Everett remained several steps away. Elodie almost left the pendant behind. Then she imagined Nathan complaining that perfectly good silver should not be abandoned outdoors, and a laugh escaped through her tears. She fastened it around her neck instead. When she stood, Everett was waiting at the path below. He did not reach for her. Elodie walked to him, and slipped her hand into his. Months earlier, an Alpha King had married his dead friend's unwanted Omega sister because he believed honor demanded it. When he finally loved her enough to set her free, he discovered he could not bear to lose her. And Elodie, who had spent a lifetime being treated as someone another person must accept, gave him the one thing his crown could never obtain for him. She chose a back,